Welcome back into the Horse Racing Show. Glad that you're tuning in on YouTube or listening to us on your iPad or following us on Google Play, wherever. You follow this man if you want to know what's happening in sports and the horse racing scene. He is Mike Watchmaker, the Daily Racing Form. It's a must to keep up with his Derby Watch to see who's in place to go to Churchill Downs, and from there on throughout the rest of the year, the best older horses, the younger horses coming up. Mike is one of the top handicappers, and I always like him because he has an opinion, and he's a great guy, and he joins us now. Mike, thanks for being on.
I'm blushing, Kenny. You can't see it, but I'm blushing. Thank you very much.
Oh, geez. Now I'm blushing. Oh, geez. Now I'm on camera. I'm looking away. I don't want people to see us. We're like the Osmonds all of a sudden, aren't we?
I know. Too much love in the air. Let's fix that.
Do you realize all the trainers and jockeys that listen to this show, and there's several that come up to me and tell me they listen to it, they just now said, "What? You and Mike Watchmaker are blushing? We don't believe it."
Yeah, well, a lot of those guys probably don't like me, but that's okay.
What I always like I say, you got an opinion. I love people that have an opinion, and not only that, they back it up. I hate the thing when somebody says, "Well, I like this." Don't you hate when somebody asks you, "Hey, who do you like?" And then you tell them and they go, "Do you, really?" Well, no, I just told you. Don't ask me. If you just don't ask me. You don't need. I had a buddy that called me and said, "Who do you like in the Belmont?" I gave him 3 horses, and none of them were Sir Winston. And so he sends me a note back like 2 days later and says, "Hey, I hit the triple. I talked to this other guy, loves Sir Winston." Well, then don't even call me anymore.
Why are you asking me? I learned a long time ago, Kenny, that never trust a public handicapper who doesn't bet. I mean, you just can't trust them. So I bet. That's why I'm still working for a living, but that's another story.
Well, when you look at this Triple Crown season, Mike, I don't know if we're ever going to see anything like it again, and I'm not talking about just the winners, but all the crazy things that happen, unseated, John Velasquez, and obviously all the things that happened in the Derby, and we cap it off with the horse that I don't think Mark Casse even thought was one of the top 2 or 3 in his stable.
Well, if we don't see another Triple Crown season like this, it would be okay with me, because I don't think it was a particularly strong one. I had reservations about this group from a very early point, right. And Jay Priven and I actually talked about it. Jay, of course, is the national correspondent for Daily Racing Form. He's my Derby Watch partner, and we kind of talked about it very early on before we even put out the first Derby Watch of the year, and that we were concerned about the overall quality of this group, and it seems to have borne itself out. A horse who was risked for a $16,000 claiming tag by some of the sharpest people in the country, finishes first in the Kentucky Derby and then is disqualified rightfully. Then a horse who was mugged in the Derby wins the Preakness with an absolute perfect golden rail trip. And then you've got another track bias situation, the Belmont Stakes. I mean, on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, the rail was absolutely the place to be at Belmont. There's just no question about it. If you're watching the main track races, you just have to see that. And Sir Winston stayed ground around both turns and only moved out to go around a couple of horses in the stretch, whereas Tacitus was at least 5 wide all the way around the racetrack. And, even in a non-biased situation, that kind of ground loss made the difference. There was only a length between Sir Winston and Tacitus at the finish, but when you factor in the bias, it's very clear that Tacitus was the best horse in the Belmont. So you've got a couple of inconclusive results and a perfect trip, a bias-aided winner right in the middle of them. It was a messy Triple Crown, and the 3-year-old division is still wide open.
Yeah, I don't know who is the best 3-year-old right now. Would it be Tacitus, maybe?
Well, I'm glad that we don't have to, say who. I mean, we can opine. Yeah. But I'm glad we don't have to vote right now.
Yeah, me too.
Because I wouldn't, I'd have a hard time voting. I mean, in my Watchmaker watch on DRF.com, which I update every week, I've got Omaha Beach on top. Yeah. Because I thought he was the best 3-year-old I've seen this year, and I think it's just terribly unfortunate for him and his connections that. That throat issue really surfaced just days before the Derby and forced him to be scratched. A Derby in which he would have been favored To me, his Arkansas Derby and his division of the Rebel wins were the best performances by a 3-year-old this year, and that's why I have him on top. I'm maximum security. I've got second because he did finish first in the Derby, and no horse has finished in front of him. And I got Tacitus third because at least he ran well in 2 of the 3 legs of the Triple Crown. I mean, he was moved up to third in the Derby on the disqualification of maximum security, and I thought he was clearly best in the Belmont.
Let me get back, because you mentioned the Derby, and we've talked about it a little bit, but I haven't had a chance to do an interview with you. And what about that Derby? Were you surprised? Did you think maximum security during this 21 minute and 57 second, I believe is the official time on it, Mike? Good gracious. It's funny, people come up to me and start telling me the time of the time that elapsed between the crossing the line and the decision made. It seemed like, it was like 2 hours when I'm out there, interviewing Bill Mott and thinking this thing's not going to end. But were you surprised at the outcome of the Derby, the decision of the Derby?
No, I was not. If as you say, Kenny, if it was 21 minutes to come to that decision, if it was a maiden claimer in the first race at Pocoloti Downs, it would have taken 6 minutes.
Yeah,
because it was a clear foul, and I think the reason why it took so long is because the stewards understood the gravity of the situation and the historical precedent that they would be setting. And they also wanted to be sure exactly where they were going to put maximum security, because he did not only interfere with War of Will, but he interfered with 2 other horses. And so it was a matter of determining, whether you would put it behind all 3 horses who were affected by maximum security coming out sharply late on the far turn. And so, I think all of that is the reason why it took that long. But I think any seasoned horse player,
right,
handicapper, had to expect this horse to come down and understood that if it was any other race, it was an absolute no-brainer. And the only reason why there seemed to be some agonizing over it is because it had never happened before in the Kentucky Derby. And you'd hate to take away a Kentucky Derby from a horse like maximum security, who, as the race was run, was best despite what he did on the far turn.
Right.
And you hate to give it to a horse in Country House who was really just lucky and in the right place at the right time. But to his credit, he ran well enough to be in the right place at the right time to inherit the win. You hate to have America's most popular horse race decided that way, but you had to do what was right, and taking maximum security down was the right thing to do.
Talking with Mike Watchmaker of the Daily Racing Forum. You want to keep up with what's happening? Read him. Go online or buy it. And I like to actually still have ink on my hands. I have no problem folding the papers and reading them, by the way. I
thought I was a dinosaur.
Wait,
oh, my goodness.
You know what?
I've made the digital transition, Kenny. I think you should, too.
Well, hey, look, I'm doing a podcast.
Good for you.
Look at me. I'm on podcasts. I'm on YouTube, Mike. How about that? Who knew?
That's great.
But what I really like most about everything is it was funny at the very end. I got through another mutual friend. He called me and said, "Hey, a buddy of mine was watching the race, the Derby, and he was disgusted. He turned it off, and then somebody called him, 30 minutes later and said, 'Hey, you won,' because he had boxed Country House and won about 11 grand.
Wow.
I said, now ain't that America?
Well, that raises an interesting question, and I don't know that anyone's actually looked into it, but I wonder, and I guess you have to give it some time, but I wonder how many uncashed winning tickets there were, how many people thought that they lost and actually wound up winning and don't know it. So that would be interesting to find out.
Let's put Jay Pribman on that.
Okay, all right. As if he doesn't have enough to do.
Yeah, I know. Jay, you and Jay are like the 2 busiest guys. You're all over the place. But it is. I think that story will come out eventually, and I wonder how many losing tickets, or how many losing tickets have been picked up along the grounds,
Yeah.
People walking by, hey, wait, is that $5 for kicks on Country House, 5 across? I got friends that always put like 5 across on the longest shot. I'm sure there's several of those.
And everybody thought Stoopers were a thing of the past. Look at that.
It's not. See, that will never, ever get out of horse racing, will it?
No, well, as long as there are still people at the racetrack, unfortunately, people still go to the racetrack.
Yeah. And this racing season, Mike, what's been your take on it all? And you know, I think at this stage, I don't know. I thought at one time, remember the mare reproductive problems, and mares were aborting their babies, and there was, you know, the grass was poisoned for the worms, and that's going back, gosh, 2 decades now almost. That was a terrible year. But I don't think we've ever seen anything like this with all the problems of Santa Anita, the problems still at Santa Anita, the controversy of the Derby. You know, this is going to be one for the record books that's not one that people want to see in a record book.
No, it's not. And what's going on at Santa Anita is it's very painful to watch. I mean, because it's one of our greatest racetracks, and it's just a beautiful facility. And I hate to see it happen. And you know, anyone who's involved in the game, you know, has an affinity and love for the horse. Even jaded handicappers like myself. Right. And you know, unfortunately, we just are not doing a very good job of getting the message out to the general public on that. And we're not speaking with a unified voice. But I think, you know, one thing that is sort of flying under the radar here, and I'm noticing it more so this year than in recent years, is the declining foal populations, and it's really playing havoc with field size, and it's playing havoc with depth in terms of good horses. And you know, I do this thing every week called the Watchmaker Watch, where I rank the top 10 in each division, and there are some divisions where it's really, really difficult to come up with number 8, 9, and 10 because there's so little depth that you're actually, you know, I have to hold my nose and, like, you know, put a couple of allowance level type horses in there. And it's something that I'm noticing more this year than I ever have before. There are some divisions where depth is really, really a major issue. And, you know, we have other divisions where depth's great. But like the turf male division, for example, I mean, bricks and mortar, if you were forced to vote for a horse of the year at on this particular date, it would probably be Bricks and Mortar, who's the top turf male by a wide margin in this country. But once you get by him and you know, the promise of Catholic Boy, who's now going to be focusing on dirt races, you know, when you're talking about really good turf males, you're talking about turf sprinters like World of Trouble and Improbus. I mean, because there aren't a lot of other good, reliable, consistent, you know, middle distance to longer distance stakes turf males in this country. And it's that's just one division where we have a stark problem. So I'm concerned, you know, I'm concerned about you know, the public perception of the game and what happened in the Kentucky Derby and what's been happening at Santa Anita. But I'm also concerned long term about declining foal populations and the effect that it's having not only in the stakes divisions, but also on the day-to-day offerings. I mean, you know, a lot of small fields are not particularly appealing to a lot of horse players, and I get it. I mean, you know, and the day-to-day product is suffering as well.
And that's we're talking with Mike Watchmaker of the Daily Racing Form. Great point about that. Even looking at like the top 10 in this NTRA poll, top 10, you know, all the horses. I have trouble. Not that, you know me, I've always had trouble. But when you get, but you know, when you do start saying, okay, now really, how much difference is there between like number 8 and number 14? You know, if you start listing like 6, 7, 8 horses, who do you put in those bottom 3 spots?
Right.
And
right.
In all divisions, I mean, I can't get excited about a whole lot of horses. I mean, I was excited about the Met Mile. I was, you know, I was excited about the whole day actually at the Belmont. And I guess going forward, who we have that you get excited about? Matoli, McKenzie. You know, we mentioned Bricks and Mortar. What's Catholic Boy going to do next? Who else is out there for those that should just keep an eye on who could be a budding star or a star that'll continue to rise?
Well, I think Guarana, for sure. I mean, she was just
Oh, yeah.
sensational winning the Acorn. And I know that she very deftly got to the inside, the best part of the racetrack, early in the race. And the ironic thing about it is Jose Ortiz rode Guarana in the Acorn, and he got her to the inside fairly quickly, and then she only went around Serengeti Empress. And Jose Ortiz was also the rider in Tacitus, who was 5 wide around the track at the Belmont. But
Yeah.
that's, I don't know. I still can't figure that out. But, even if Guarana for a time in the Acorn was on the best part of the racetrack, that performance was just stunning for a filly to do that in only her second career start off a maiden win that, albeit was a monster maiden win, still just a maiden win in the slop. And now she's running on a dry racetrack against the Kentucky Oaks winner. And she made the Serengeti Empress, that Kentucky Oaks winner, look helpless by comparison. And it was just, she went from a one start maiden winner to the top 3-year-old filly in the country and the 133 and change it took to run the Acorn. And she is somebody to be really excited about going forward. You mentioned Mitole. It's going to be very interesting to see what Steve Asmussen and the owners of that horse do going down the road, because first of all, I thought he was a fortunate winner of the Met Mile. I don't want to rain on his parade because, it was the first time in his life going as far as a mile. But McKinsey was the best horse in the Met Mile. He got stopped in upper stretch and had to angle back inside. That was when he had already begun his rally, and he had to start his rally all over again, and he was just eating Mitole up in the late stages. But it'll be interesting to see what Mitole's connections do, because it sure to me looked like the mile was about it for him.
Mm-hmm.
And, so what are they going to do with him now? I guess point for the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, maybe. Well, what races do you run in? Well, probably the 4 go at Saratoga, which is a 7 furlong race. Outside of that, I'm not sure what you do with him. McKinsey's got a ton of options. Midnight Bisou is, in the absence of Monomoy Girl, is a very interesting filly. She's now 8 for 8 at a mile and a 16th and 0 for 4 going longer than a mile and a 16th. So, it'll be interesting to see what she does. But then again, there's not a lot of depth in the older dirt female division, and she's going to catch a field going a mile and 8 in a stake race that she's just going to have to win. Bricks and Mortar, terrific horse. Catholic Boy going back to the dirt adds some much needed depth to the older dirt male division. And the turf female division is a tremendous division. Rushing Fall was brilliant winning the Just a Game.
Mm-hmm.
She's only lost once in her entire career, and the defending champion in the division, Sister Charlie, hasn't even run yet this year.
Right.
And it'll be very interesting to see what she does when she comes back. But when she comes back, she's going to find a very, very tough division. She's even in her own barn. Chad Brown trains Rushing Fall. He trains Sister Charlie. He trains Homerique, who won the New York. He trains Competition of Ideas, who was a narrowly beaten second in the New York. He trains Rimska. He's got like every decent turf female in the country, save 1 or 2. It's quite amazing, actually. But and he also trains Bricks and Mortar, just to be, and Guarana.
Because he's got nothing else to do.
Yeah.
He thought he'd pick up a 3-year-old filly along the way.
Along the way, yeah.
For Chad, that was a little emotional. I interviewed him right after that Acorn, and of course with Ghost Sapper and, going back with Bobby Frankel, the great trainer and who's his mentor. I think he was a little emotional after the Acorn because of all that tie-in. As emotional as Chad gets. I'm not saying he was crying or anything, but, I could tell that really was special. Not just she was special in the win, but because of all the connections tied in there, a little history lesson going on with him.
I think that's really actually kind of cool. And because of the Ghost Zapper connection and, what a racehorse Ghost Zapper was.
Oh, yeah.
He was tremendous. Grade 1 level from 6 furlongs to a mile and a quarter. He was just a tremendous horse. And he says that Guarana's is very reminiscent of Ghost Zapper.
Yeah.
If she's half as good as he was, then she's going to have some career in front of her, but she already had some career in front of her. What an Acorn that was. So, that 3-year-old filly division is very good, Kenny. They got there are 3-year-old filly sprinters that are just tremendous. I mean, break even won the Jersey Girls Stakes the day after the Belmont at Belmont Park. Kofefe, who was so sensational winning the Miss Preakness down at Pimlico around Preakness time. Bellafina, who was the favorite in the Oaks, now she's going to cut back to shorter distance races. Mm-hmm. A race like the Test of Saratoga is just going to be an absolute war. I mean, that's a race really, really to look forward to.
The girls are beating the boys right now, I think, in the 3-year-old division.
In terms of entertainment value, no question about it. No question. Do you think if Mr. West had called you up and said, Mike, I respect you as a handicapper and all your experience, what should I do with what should I do if he's healthy and all that with maximum security? If that question were asking me of the Derby, I mean, I have my opinion. I've said it a few times. What would you have told him? Well, it depends on when he called, because I think that he should have run on the Preakness.
Me too.
But he didn't, and by turning his back on the last 2 legs of the Triple Crown, he sort of abdicated as far as I'm concerned, he abdicated his leadership role in the division. And now there's a lot of rumblings that he's not even going to run on the Pegasus, which was intended to be his prep for the Haskell. Mm-hmm. But Mr. West has a horse. Let's not forget about Game Winner.
Oh, yeah.
He was the champion 2-year-old male last year. And I wasn't particularly especially taken with him last year. I actually liked Improbable in Bob Baffert's barn better than Game Winner. But Game Winner has been just brutally unlucky this year. He had horrendous trips in the Kentucky Derby, in the Santa Anita Derby. He had a major excuse in the Rebel when he was beaten the nose. I mean, by Omaha Beach, who I regard so highly. Game Winner just needs he just needs a helpful ride. I mean, just a fair, even trip. I mean, not even helpful, just a fair trip. And he's going to string some wins together and in a division that is going to be won in races like the Haskell and Travers and Pennsylvania Derby, and how these 3-year-olds run against older males in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Game Winner is still a very, very live player here, even though he has not actually won a race. And here we're talking in the middle of June. The whole division now, there are a lot of live horses, but I think Game Winner is a very, very dangerous horse. He's just been extremely unlucky this year.
That's a great point. And, you figure you're not going to discount Baffert out. Somewhere along the line, something's going to happen. I mean, I think Improbable's been like the beaten favorite in his last 4 races.
Yeah, he has. He's been disappointing. I mean, he didn't have an excuse really in the Derby. I thought, the Preakness, just because it was, attrition had taken such a toll in the field in the Preakness that, the Preakness was going to be a race that he would win, and he just didn't, fire at all. So there's something not quite right there. I mean, I know that he's a better horse than he showed in the first 2 legs of the Triple Crown, and at some point he's going to win another big race. But I think he's got a much higher hill to climb than some other members in this 3-year-old male division.
Talking with Mike Watchmaker, the brilliant handicapper for the Daily Racing Form, and I want to ask, do you have favorite horses over the years? Horses that you just maybe that they might not have been great horses. Obviously, I love Secretariat, Seattle Slew. Yeah, I got that. But, there's been a horse or 2 or 3 out there that you just have a great memory of, that you always enjoyed watching them compete.
Well, yes and no. To me, my all-time favorite horse was Secretariat.
Of course.
He just did things that made your jaw drop. And what was so impressive about Secretariat, and it's kind of funny, I'm a 3rd-generation gambler, and I started going to the track because my dad was at the track every day, and I started going when I was 12 years old in May of 1968. And back then you had to be 21 to get into the racetrack. But Bill Veeck, the baseball impresario from the Chicago White Sox, Eddie Goodell fame, he headed up a group that bought Suffolk Downs, and one of the first things he did was get legislation passed to allow minors into the racetrack when accompanied by an adult. And I started tagging along to the track with my dad. And if you think I'm a jaded horse player, you should have seen him. But in any event, Secretariat was the one horse I ever heard him term monster. Yeah. That had an, I mean, not only did Secretariat have a massive impact on me, but the fact that he impressed my father was just triply impressive to me. So, he did stuff that was amazing. And, people talk about his Belmont Stakes and, the great performance in the whole floor, the move on the first turn in the Preakness Stakes. But, it was like winning the Marlboro Cup over that star-studded field, and then running giant races on the turf after that. I mean, just like winning two of the biggest turf races that we had at the time. It beating horses like Tentam on the turf was just like absurd. I mean, he just was an incredible horse, and nobody can touch him as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I've had stable pets over the course of the years, and and the assorted $5,000 claimer that helped me cash a bet and help pay my rent for the next month, that kind of stuff. But the one horse that really, I unabashedly gush over is Secretariat.
Do you remember your first big hit? Were you with your dad when you had that? And you know what? And at your age, when we're all teenagers, the first big hit could have been like $50, $100. I mean, that's money when you're 18, 19 years old.
Yeah. Well, I was much younger than that. Kenny, I really don't remember my first big hit. But I remember the first time I actually went up and made a bet. Uh-huh. And it was at Scarborough Downs in Maine. And, they raced a thoroughbred meet there during the summer at night, and the mosquitoes were big enough to throw saddles on. and I think that every race was a $1,200 claimer, and 1,200, not 12,000, 1,200. Right. And I was at Scarborough Downs, and I'll never forget it. I mean, I think I was probably 14 or 15 and looked every bit of 10. And it was late in the night, and there was nobody left in the racetrack. And my father said, "Why don't you go up and make the bet on this race?" And I'd never done it before. And I said, "You got to be 21. The guy's going to embarrass me. He's going to tell me no." He said, "Just go ahead and do it." So this is all happening in front of a mutual teller, and the mutual teller sees what's going on. My dad hands me like $5 or $10 a bet on a horse, and I look at the mutual teller, and the mutual teller starts waving me towards the window. And it was like, I look back on that, it's like he's the devil. Come on, little guy. So I do remember that very, very vividly.
That's a great memory. Mosquitoes with saddles.
Yeah, really. They were giant.
And I'm glad you brought up Bill Veeck a minute ago. One of my all-time favorite books about sports figures, whatever sports you want to go with the genre, is Veeck is in Wreck. I love that book. I was a big fan of Bill Veeck on the baseball. And you mentioned Eddie Goodell.
Right.
We're the guys that and people should Google this stuff and look it up if you don't know what we're talking about, because I don't know if there's ever been anybody more innovative in team sports, much less just baseball. And now you mentioned like getting minors into the racetrack than Bill Veeck. He was quite the visionary.
Well, I don't know if he actually wrote the book, Kenny, but he might have written the book, but there was a book about his stewardship of Suffolk Downs, which lasted, I don't know, 3 or 4 or maybe 5 years or something like that. And the name of the book is called 30 Tons a Day.
Oh, okay.
And it's a great book. It's hysterical. It's well worth reading. But 30 Tons a Day, the name of the book comes from, because that was the weight of the horse manure that was coming out of Suffolk Downs at the end of every day.
Oh, that's classic. Okay. Now I'm writing that down. 30 tons a day. Okay, there's on my something to read this summer.
I hope you can find it.
The way things are anyway these days, isn't it amazing all the stuff you can find? And does it Has all this technology affected you as a handicapper, or do you still just go out there and look, and like you talk about track bias still being very important, how the day's playing out, you always pay attention to that as well as anyone? I mean, has technology influenced that much, or is it still basically, look at the numbers, look at the track that day, maybe look at the horses as they come onto the track?
Well, you still have to roll up your sleeves and do the work.
Yeah.
It's not breaking rocks in the sun, but it is time-consuming work where, you got to watch replays, you got to, do your speed. I do my own speed figures, have for decades, and you got to put in the time and the effort and the work to do the handicapping, because that's the foundation on which everything's built on. Your opinion is built on that. Your recognition of track bias is built on that, because if you haven't handicapped a card and have expectations of how horses should run, and then see the racetrack toy or monkey with those expectations, and make horses run better than they should have run, or make horses run worse than they should have run, and it's because of the race. I mean, that's how you reach these conclusions. But technology has been a tremendous help. I mean, you used to have to keep stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of old racing forms to go back and look up, the PPs of past horses and charts and stuff like that. And you can do that all now. Here comes a shameless plug with DRF Formulator. I mean, you go into Formulator, you can pull up PPs of the horses every horse run against. You can see most replays. Replay access is so much better than it ever. It's so much better now than it's ever been. You could go back and look at charts and see all kinds of trainer stats. Back in the old days, the guys would be slaving over finding out how trainer X did with first-time starters, and you had a sense that trainer X did well with first-time starters, which you never really knew. And now that kind of information is almost taken for granted, whereas it wasn't that long ago. Only a precious few had that information. What it's done is it's made the game more difficult. Because now the betting public, to a certain extent, has become more sophisticated. And let's face it, that when I make a bet, I'm betting against the rest of the betting public. I'm not betting against the house. I'm betting against everybody else. And many of those people have done their work too. Of course, that the sophistication of the betting public does vary from circuit to circuit. And, even though I live in New York and the New York Race Association is my home circuit, every now and then I will adopt a lesser circuit as sort of my guilty pleasure, because it's always fun to bet, on cheap racing. It reminds me of my youth, and but also to be involved in pools with quote unquote less sophisticated players. So, it's fun to do that too. You still got to put the work in, but technology's been a tremendous help. And like I said, I mean, DRF Formulator is a big part of that. And, I can't imagine any handicapper out there worth his salt that isn't at least familiar with Formulator. And if you're not, you really owe it to yourself to give it a try, because it's amazing.
Wholeheartedly agree that, and keep up with Mike and the watch list there of the horses and the divisions for those people that just kind of casually follow racing after the Triple Crown. I think that's, if you do that, you'll be able to at least be informed enough to talk to your friends about it, and maybe then look into it more, and you might want to go out and make a few bets yourself. Look at that. We're doing better work than the NTRA promoting this sport right now.
Just give us the reins, Kenny.
Yeah, we wish. Mike, I can't thank you enough for being with me, my friend, and I do want you to come back.
Oh, great pleasure, and anytime I'd be happy to.
All right, thank you. Mike Watchmaker from the Daily Racing Form, as good as it gets here. You want to talk about handicapping and what he just said about the formulator and everything else with the DRF. We'll have more of the Horse Racing Show right after this.